for Ponies, a book fictionalizing students with learning disabilities. And that is wonderful, Perry, because I was a special education teacher, and I just think that is amazing that you've gone and done that. Despite living in Kitchener-Waterloo for 35 years and having just completed a volunteer stint at the Memorial Cup, Perry is still an avid Pete's fan, a team he played one season for. His ears perk up when he runs across any mention of Lakefield in conversation or in the press. He says that although he lives in Waterloo, his home is Lakefield and always will be. We are so honored now to share memories of the Coyles and the Chitticks. Thank you.
This is the first night we're trying these new microphones. It could be the last. Yes, can you hear me? We're not videotaping.
About the depression. I forget what kind of questions I asked, but I have them in front of me. So Frank bought a truck. Where did he get the money?
Well, he went to several places and they laughed at him. He said he'd be out of work in a month. That was at a couple of banks, and then I'm not too sure where he got it. I think it was from a finance company, but he and Stuart Myers went together on this.
So,
And they mortgaged, or they came and used old households, furniture, and everything as collateral.
right, yeah. And at that time, like, where were they living? Where did they live? The place you fell down the stairs.
No, well, we moved them.
Oh,
We were over beside Mr. Graham there for a while, on Nelson Street, the Graham family.
yeah.
And I wasn't very old there either, was I? Gord was born over there, yeah.
And when were you born? When was Gord born?
Gord's a lot older than I am. I don't know whether he wants his age told. No, Gord was born on January the 23rd, 1934.
Yeah.
And I was born August 25th, 1930.
Right. Okay.
Right? And Gord was given the last rites of the Catholic Church when he was born, along with my mom.
Yeah.
Because he weighed 13 pounds and had the cord wrapped around his neck. And he died.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I think he's okay now, though, isn't he?
So, with Frank and his new truck, he's hauling, was it nepheline?
Yeah,
Nepheline from the mine to where?
to Lakefield.
To Lakefield. And like you would remember, but perhaps you were told, what was the Stony Lake Road like then?
The width of the truck.
Most of it was corduroy.
Yes, yeah, a lot.
And my recollections of driving on Stony Lake Road in the 60s and 70s is that it's an interesting road to drive on. It was paved then, but there's numerous hills and turns and corners, and so that must have been an interesting adventure, driving a truck back then on that road.
It was a day, it took a day. It took 10 hours.
10 hours to drive?
And get a load and come on.
10 hours. Oh. Now, did he mention any mishaps or any stories about the truck or his experience?
Lots, and Dad would tell you 1,500 times the same thing. As time wore on. And it's hard to remember. There's so numerous.
Now, before we talk about his garage on Bridge Street, you mentioned earlier that he had a garage on behind his
Behind the
house.
house. He lived in the house there. There used to be the commercial, Alf Hudson's secondhand shop, and a house. And the house next to it, I think, who's in that now? There's an accountant in there, I believe now.
Oh, Dan Roseborough.
Yeah. We lived in that one, but there wasn't any property with that because Dr. Moore's property and the house next door's property hooked up behind. I'll tell you a little story about that property too. We did move into the next house so Dad could build a garage on at the back and put a gas pump in for the trucks. But anyway, Gord hurt his leg one time and had him to Dr. Moore, who was our neighbor, and he kept saying, it's okay, there's nothing the matter with it, there's nothing the matter with it. So it was still hurting him. So he said, so I hear, anyway, and so Mom took him up to Dr. Smith. He was our other doctor in town. And Dr. Smith put a cast on it, so Mom wore long pants on him so he wouldn't, so Dr. Moore wouldn't see it. So anyway, we weren't home 20 minutes. Well, he was out behind over and Dr. Moore was out and he was pulling his pants up from him. Oh, Mom could have shot him.
Was the good doctor okay with that?
He was fine.
Now, when did he start the garage on Bridge Street?
The one that's there now,
Yeah.
1939, I think we moved over.
You moved over at that time, and you moved into the house beside it,
Right.
and the garage started at that
The
time.
garage wasn't there, Dad built the garage.
He built the garage, so you moved first, you had
No,
the...
I don't, no, the garage was up before we moved.
Okay, so, all right. And like, when he started the garage, what was it like? Was it just gas, or was he...
Gas and
Service.
mechanics. Service.
Right, okay. And do you know who was working with him at that time?
Theo Down was his
Oh,
mechanic.
sure. Yeah, all right. Yeah. And what kind of gas?
White Rose,
White Rose.
which is now Shell.
Right, yeah. White Rose was a Canadian firm from Alberta. Yeah. So you moved into the house in 39. You're 9 years old at that time. Can you remember anything about the early year or years at the garage, like how business was going? And you had Theo Downs there. Anyone else around at that time, or just the two of you?
Well, there was Dad and Theo, and then of course, there was other employees hired, and then the war started, and there was rationing of gas, and you had to use coupons, and then there was power outages, and Dad bought a transformer and power to give gas to truckers who needed gas for doing war jobs. And at that time, every truck that came in said they were doing the war job. But you had to use coupons. Yes.
And when did Frank acquire a bus or a bus route? Was that early on, or did that come later?
Well, that was later, actually, because he bought the bus, because he was taking kids around to play hockey and stuff like that. They outgrew his halftime
Oh, okay.
back,
Yeah.
so,
And he was the driver.
yeah.
Yeah.
On the bus?
Yeah.
I think he did drive it, but then different ones drove it.
And so he started driving kids around to hockey games. Did he go into a business side with it,
Well,
or?
he could take the bus, he had the charter from Curve Lake to Peterborough,
Okay,
but he could do charters.
right, yeah.
He eventually sold it to Bolton's.
Sold it to Bolton, Trentway,
Mhm.
which became Trentway. All right.
They did well.
Well,
They wanted the franchise, you know.
and getting back to the garage again, and I know over the years there was numerous expansion to it, but we're still back in the 30s and 40s, like, let's say to the end of the war. Was there much expansion at that time, or?
Well, they used the naphthalene for glass and for war materials. And so Dad purchased more trucks. The garage he built on the main street had a bay that serviced 4 trucks. And it wasn't really big enough, so the other one he built on behind it over there too. And that was, I think that was during the war. Yeah, and I'll tell you a little story about the garage on the main street. We had a German Shepherd, maybe his picture's here somewhere on a truck, I think, somewhere. But anyway, her name was Queenie, and she had pups, and it was during the winter time, and Dad got shavings in to put around the furnace so the pups and the dog would be warm in the garage. And so anyway, got up at 4 o'clock for a trip to the mine the next morning and went out, and no pups in the garage. And the shavings were all burnt, and Queenie's feet were all burned. She carried the pups, put them in the pit, and put out the fire. And so Mr. Morley came over when he came down to open up the drugstore, and he says, "I'll look after your dog." And he nursed her back. Yeah,
Good start.
smart dog. Yeah.
Now, later on, after the war and into the 50s and so on, the business was expanding. You mentioned Theo Down was his first employee, and I remember him when I was a little guy. But it seemed to me that there were many mechanics there and all kinds of things happening around the shop and the building itself. Tires, for example. George. And when did George start?
When did you come, George?
52 or 3, I'm not sure.
Okay. And when did you retire?
He's still working.
54.
When I was, I don't know, I was in 63, I was aged 63 and I was
94.
94.
That's
She
his
remembers
age
the
now.
That's his age now.
And there was a parts department. When I mention these things, if you can think of any employees.
Oh, there's lots of employees. There's Ralph Jackman, there's...
Oh, he was in parts,
Mhm.
wasn't he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Harold
Over the bus.
Coons,
Yeah.
and in the garage there, who else? Oh, mercy, there was lots of employees that came and went.
And when did Gord start working there full-time? He probably started part-time and,
Oh, when he was in school.
yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. When did he start full-time, Iona?
I didn't know him then.
We didn't know him then. I don't think he ever did start full-time.
He's worked there all his life.
Um, school pretty
Right,
well.
yeah, okay. Was also, he had many trucks by this time in the 50s and 60s, and he had a gravel business with stone crushers and crushers, yeah. And it seems to me there are many trucks back at the mine at that time.
Yeah,
Like, can you remember
how many?
how big that was? There were trucks all over the place.
I can't remember how
Right.
many he had. He numbered them all as he got them, and they got up pretty high, but then he
Yeah.
sold.
Now, I remember the Coyle logo was orange and green. How did that come about? Do you know where that came from?
I think Jack designed that.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
He was your dad?
Before you leave the 50s, I remember riding my bicycle home from the Grove to Young's Point after the end of school at 5:30 in the afternoon in the winter, when it was quite dark, and often there was 8 inches of snow, and these huge, enormous trucks came up behind me, but I was pushing 2 generators with 2 taillights and 2 headlamps, and they didn't hit me.
Well, you taught at the high school too, didn't you?
Later, yes?
Yeah, you had them, didn't you, Mr. Townsend?
Yeah.
No, I think Terry's ahead of me.
Oh, really?
I got to the high school at 1970.
Well, that was my 3rd year in grade 13.
I do remember Kirk.
In the late 50s or early 60s, he went into car sales also. Do you
And tractor sales.
Cars and tractors, and he was, how did he get involved in car sales? Was he not connected with the Peterborough, was it Williamson's?
Yeah,
Was it
Norris
Williamson's?
Road.
Down near the Memorial Center?
Yeah. Norris, yeah,
So it was Mercury and,
Meteor.
Meteor, yeah, okay, all right. And Ford tractors also, yeah. Yeah. And you worked there
Off and on.
off and on. And when did Frank, we'll just go through Frank's career here. When did he begin to cut back on work? Can you remember that?
Well, it was after he got away from the house, because as long as he lived in the house beside the garage and he saw a car at the pumps, he ran. No matter where he was. If he was in the house looking out the front window, George, he'd have to buzz out because they weren't coming out fast enough. And Dad always did that. And Greg Coyle, his grandson, is just like him. Greg doesn't walk, he runs.
That's good service.
Oh, it is good service, excellent.
And do you know when Frank retired then?
Retired completely? No, I don't remember. He went to Florida for the winters. And,
Okay.
yes. Well, Mom died in '66 in Detroit, and then Dad remarried my aunt, and then they spent winters in Florida.
Right.
And he kind of tapered away from work.
Yeah, and Gord was taking over, yeah, right. In his non-work life, like what did Frank do for fun? What did he do in spare time?
Well, he belonged to a lot of clubs. He was a charter member of the Lions Club. He belonged to the Lodge in Lakefield and the Lodge in Hastings. And he belonged to the Jesters, the Shrine. He was busy with a lot of clubs. He enjoyed that.
Yeah,
And getting away, and then he took trips. Loved to travel.
yeah. And of course, those clubs did and still do a lot for communities.
Oh,
and,
yes.
yeah, for sure, yeah. It's a way of giving back and making the place better for people. And holidays, you mentioned going to Florida. He loved going to Florida. And do you know when he started doing that? When in
I
his life?
started going to Florida, I can't recall the year he first went to Florida.
60s, 50s?
Probably the 50s
Okay, yeah,
for a trip,
yeah.
for trips, just 2-week trips maybe.
And eventually he bought a place down there. And where was that?
Condominium. It was on Treasure Island in St. Petersburg.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. And he really enjoyed that?
Yes, he
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Had a lot of company, loved company. Here.
Were there any memorable moments or events, like if Frank was here now, like, could he relate a memorable event?
You'd be here for 2 weeks. He had a terrific memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't inherit that at all.
Well, it's a shame we didn't catch him sooner.
Yeah. No, there was a lot of memorable things, a lot of laughs. In our family, we had a lot of fun.
That's what I remember, Frank, yeah.
He loved to play cards. And there was one memorable night, you may recall that. We had just finished Christmas dinner, and we were playing cards, and Dad loved wrestling. He'd go to wrestling matches. And he was dead serious about wrestling. We were sitting there having a game of euchre. There was 2 tables maybe of us, but I was at the table with you and Ron and Dad and I. And you said, "Whatever happened to Big John Stud?" with a straight face. Ron started to laugh. And then he started to heave. He brought up all his turkey dinner, and you were sitting there. "Yes, Frank, whatever happened to him?" Oh my! And Dad went right on, carried on telling you, Big John Stud. But he went to the wrestling matches every Thursday night at the Brock Street Arena, and I took dancing lessons right across the street from Ryan Perry Laird, and he'd drop me off there on Thursday nights for dancing, and then he'd go to the wrestling matches. And I could hardly wait to get out to get over because you'd see women throwing chairs.
That's true.
It was just wild. It was amazing the girls they got. That's when Mike and, what were their names? They were great wrestlers. I forget now. But Dad took it so seriously, yet they all came in the same car. And left together. You couldn't tell him that, though.
He did love his wrestling, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
And he told me many times over the years that, in case I didn't know, he let me know that it wasn't real. But when he's watching this non-real event, he'd be going, "Jesus Christ." Did you see that? Did you see? How did they let him get away with it? 10 minutes later, you know it's not real. Now, you were born in 1930. Do you have any preschool memories at all?
I remember the first day of school.
Okay.
I remember the Montgomery family lived on the main street. And Verda, Keith's mom, and my mom, we all had cats. And their main job was to, when the cats had kittens, was to go off together with a bag. The kittens. Where did they go, Mom? Where are they? Oh, they had to go for a little swim. But anyway, I remember my first day of school. Lori Moran took me to school. Remember her, Keith?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And she took me to school. And then after that, it was just a race to get Miss Kidd's hand to get to school.
Miss Kidd was your,
Kindergarten.
and she was mine, 20 years later.
Almost forever.
That's right.
Taught a lot of kids.
Now, the school, again, for the younger people here, or the really young people, I should say, where was the school at that time?
It was, there's a seniors home there now.
Okay,
Mhm.
and the school was kindergarten to,
Well, actually, there was, high school was beside it. Both schools.
both schools were there at that time.
Kindergarten, 13.
Kindergarten to 13, so the public school was in one building and the high school was
It's
in,
on the far side, yeah.
okay, all right. Yeah. Now, did you have the primer Dick and Jane when you were
No, we had John and Mary,
John and Mary?
yes,
So see,
and Peter.
Peter, John, and Mary.
Peter, John,
A little book.
yeah, yeah,
so see Peter run,
yeah.
They have a
Spot,
dog
Spot.
was the first teacher. Okay.
That's right.
It was an interesting book. Did you ever read it?
I have dyslexia, so. Being a retired school teacher, discipline perhaps is a little different today than in those days. Like, did students behave themselves like that in those days? And if not, what happened to students?
We were sent out in the hall a fair amount of times, and it just depends what teacher you had. If we were in grade 10, I remember, Keith was in that grade, and we'd get sent out in the hall for some reason. We'd go into the library and shoot National Geographic books under the door. Miss Stewart, do you remember that page? And we did a few things, yeah. And we used to, but they were a good bunch of teachers we had. Yeah. Tap on the rag and tell them it was birds or something. And what else? Keith used to make us go down, and we were right above Bessie Stabler's room, and she was a magnificent teacher. She taught French and Latin. She was a great teacher. But we had to crawl along under her windows to get whatever we had to pick up for Keith off the ground. We got into a little trouble over that a time or two. It was fun.
I had Bessie Stabler as my teacher also, and on November 22nd, 1963, I was in Bessie Stabler's grade 10 Latin class, and Howard Manchester came over the PA and said the president has been shot and school's canceled. So 30 seconds later, I'm back in our house, right beside the school, watching Walter Cronkite. So,
Yeah.
That's,
Harry,
yeah.
when you had Bessie, did she still stand up at the back and pull the girdle down? Or did she lost some weight?
She had two changes of clothes. She had a dress for the spring and fall and a suit for the winter.
You may have to ask a young female student about that procedure.
I can remember people will say, "Where does your Latin teacher live?" And I'd say, "Over the bar at the ship and shore." That's true, eh? That's true.
Exactly.
Over the bar at the ship and shore.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some memories of Queen Street when you're growing up. And I know that that's probably a favorite of, well, there's not too many commercial streets in Lakefield, but certainly Queen Street is a memorable one. And like, can you remember the stores
Yes.
and owners and workers and?
We can start up at Spence's store, which is vacant right now. And that was Spence's store.
Yeah.
And next to that, Kenny Remnant had a little snack bar at one time, where the flower shop is there.
Yeah.
And there's the bank, and then Frank Erskine had a store that sold radios, kind of a hardware store, and then there was a tinsmith place beside him. Do you remember Medilla's, was it, Keith?
He was a good friend of Elmer's.
Medilla's, wasn't it? At the side?
There was a bowling alley.
Yeah.
Well, there was a bowling alley there afterwards. Frank Erskine's
Later.
store burnt down, yeah. And then there was Grace Young's. And then there was Judson Hall and Mr. Porter. And Mr. Lake was the baker there. And then there was Webster's,
Wanamaker shoe store?
well, there was Webster's furniture store. Mrs. Webster had that, and Molly Thompson. Then there was a vacant lot, and Freddie Wanamaker's. Freddie's was the place to hang out. And he had that place during the war, and you couldn't get ice cream. And he'd stick that container down into the ice cream cooler and let on, it was for milkshakes, putting ice cream in it, just add a little more milk and flavor in it. He says, gotta save it for the Sundays. But Grace made great pies, didn't she, his wife? But that was the place to be, and that's where the guys on leaves would come home and hang. I can remember the Brown boys coming there,
It was the Coronation Inn. It was the
Coronation
Coronation
Inn,
year
yeah.
that it was built.
Okay, and then there was Glenn Wanamaker, his brother, had a little shoe shop, or a shoe repair store.
That was a bar, wasn't it?
Pardon me? Glenn was the one that if we skipped school, he'd take us into the show
Yeah.
and bring us back. And have us back that we'd be home just like going home from school. Glenn was a good person. And then there was another kind of a space. Eventually Chamber of Commerce went in, and then there was Northy's drugstore. And then there was Mr. Burroughs had a $5-2 store. I think he was there before Jack Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Art Burroughs.
$5.
And then there was a Chinese restaurant. The Wangs owned it at one time. The family that lived in Lakefield, they were clever students. And then there was it Huts that had the pool hall?
Ernie Allen had
Ernie
it
Allen
before the war.
had it, yeah. And then Mr. Redpath, Charlie's dad, had the paper there. And then the store on the corner, was that Warren Payne then?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, lunch counter.
Yeah, and then Teddy Crawford across the road had the butcher shop, where the clinic is now. And then there was the Volca store, then there was Dad Burgess, we called him. He had a drugstore, and then the post office.
Right.
And crossing the road, there was it was eventually Bob McCracken's, but Leonard's Hardware.
Yeah.
And Barney Edwards was in part of that at the time, a barber.
Yeah.
And coming up there then, who
Going
was
back
in
north
that?
now?
Pardon me?
You going back north now?
Yeah. Who was in the little shop that Ron Hall eventually had?
John Brown
He started
with the cedar oils.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And then the hydro office, was it?
Yep.
Yeah. And then the telephone office. And then Tanner's drugstore. And then Dr. Moore lived in the big house now where the restaurant and the art shop is.
Yeah.
And then Rhoda Fens lived next. they were the ones we exchanged houses with them. And then us, and then Alf Hudson, and they had an apartment up over the second-hand shop. And then Walter Peacock, and you go in there,
Village.
pardon me?
Then Millage, I think.
Oh, and then Villages, yeah. But Walter, you'd go in, he was Pearl Goodall's uncle, Walter Peacock, an old guy, and you go in, Bill, old Uncle Bill. You go in there, what the hell do you want? He'd say, an ice cream cone, you got a nickel, you know, and he hated to get up. Then he had a pool hall in there eventually, Pearl's husband, Goodall was. And then Millages, and then the funeral, Cannon's funeral home.
Where Villages is now.
Yes, and then Lloyd used to have a service station across the corner, or right on the corner where the new post office is, and the creamery was right behind that.
Right, yeah, yeah. And the creamery made deliveries in those days?
Yes, and so did her Kemp had a milk too.
And this was in a truck, or this wasn't horse?
They were horse.
Horse in the 30s? There's still horses around at that time? Yeah.
That's all it was.
Who's cleaning up all the mess?
Mr. Henry.
Yeah, it rained.
One thing that people say, people my age and perhaps a little older, is people today are talking about global warming, and although we got a lot of snow this winter, it seems to me the recollection is that there was a lot more snow around then, and perhaps it was a little bit colder.
Well, I think the reason was that there wasn't any equipment to take it away like this. But I can remember living on the main street and never saw the other side of the street, unless you dug a tunnel through the snow to get across, and all winter, because the snowbanks were so high.
Never removed it, it's there.
It was there, yeah,
Until it melted.
yeah.
When I was bicycling from Young's Point to Lakefield to school, they plowed maybe 3 or 4 days after the storm, so I bicycled through 8 inches of snow.
Yeah, I don't know how you did it.
I did see on CBC speaking about that situation, because the CBC announcer said to this meteorologist how she could remember so much more snow in the 60s or whenever. And he said, you have to remember, in the 60s, you were this high. And you're looking up, and I'm going, geez, you know, in the 50s, I was that high, and I'm looking up at the snow, walking up Queen Street. But that, plus, they never shot, or they never took it away and dumped it somewhere.
One man ran the village at the time, and that was Harry Hill. He looked after everything.
Just a few quick questions on the Depression. Were you aware as young kids there was a thing called the Depression going on?
No, I wasn't.
The adults were aware of that, and they were so they kept kids pretty well protected from what was going on. How do people, having said that, how do people pay for housing, groceries, gas, tax, clothes, doctor, dentist?
Doctors were paid with potatoes, chickens, anything, you know.
They supposed to pay people, either.
That's right.
They pretty much pay.
No.
Right. And was there a lot of credit going on too? Can I put it on the bill? Was
Oh,
that
yeah, the
happening?
stores,
No?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
We paid this bill at Porter's store twice a year.
Yeah,
Okay.
just when the crops,
I think Betsy just did that, I just heard that.
Yeah.
Now, you probably wouldn't remember, but perhaps looking back and thinking back now from an adult's point of view, what did families go without when they had to make tough choices?
Toilet paper.
Newspaper
We never did have toilet paper, it was Eaton's catalog. And not only could you sit out in the outhouse, you could look at the catalog and you wouldn't rip out the page you wanted to keep.
The Second World War started in '39, and you'd be around 8 or 9 then. Can you remember before the war began, adults talking about the possibility of a war?
Yeah, we heard it on the radio. Yeah.
Right. Can you remember the day that Canada declared war?
Yeah, Norma and I were taking papers at the time. My cousin, Norma, and, well, it was a headline of a paper, that's how we knew. She took the Star and I took the Examiner, and we were trying to figure out who got the bigger headline. And, and it was the same when the war was finished.
Yeah.
It was the headline.
Do you remember Lakefield men or women enlisting and going off to war?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
lots of them.
And did they join a local regiment or?
They would join in Peterborough, I think, yeah.
What was the name of the regiment? You know?
Hastings and Prince Edward.
Hastings
Hastings and Prince Edward.
and,
HDPs.
okay.
And the third field park,
And the
third field park.
third,
Lakefield fell into that.
okay.
And the number went off to Toronto and joined the Royal Canadian Navy through HMCS York,
Yeah.
All right,
as George Cook, my late brother-in-law.
okay. Are those two regiments still around today?
Yes.
Okay. How did people follow the progress of the war? Was it through newspaper, radio?
Newspaper and radio.
Newsreels at movies?
Oh, yeah, newsreels before a show, if you went to a movie.
Do you have any memories of people, and again, you're pretty young, and so the war wouldn't be a 24-hour preoccupation for a young person. But do you have any memories at all that there might be a possibility that the bad guys would win?
Yeah,
Like where
we
people,
were scared that the Germans would win. And especially when we heard that there was German prisoners being brought here, up around Bowmanville, I think. There was some.
Okay.
I was afraid of them anyway.
And how did the war affect daily life for people in Lakefield? Was there rationing going on?
Yeah, rationing, yeah.
And what
More sugar.
was
Sugar
rationing?
and butter and all kinds of things, yeah.
Do you remember the day the war ended in Europe?
Yeah.
Got a half day of school.
Yeah, we all went into Peterborough. We all went into George Street in Peterborough and
Celebration.
it was closed right off. There was parades and people hollering and yelling and,
Beautiful sunny day
yeah.
in Oakville.
Oh, it was a nice day here too.
Do you remember the day when the war ended in the Pacific?
Not as
Yes,
much,
just
no,
no.
not as
I do have a memory of that because a dentist who lived near Kawartha Park had a disappearing propeller boat, and he went around the lake and announced with his megaphone, that was, just a cardboard tube, that the war in Japan was over. That was in August, I think.
Do you remember troops coming home?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I remember my uncle coming home in October, yeah. It was a big day.
You talked a little bit about, we're in the 40s now, but this is non-war stuff. And you mentioned a little bit about high school and you and Keith Montgomery getting in trouble all the time.
Is he here tonight?
Part of us never stop, I'll tell you that.
He's here.
Who was, was there any extracurricular activities
We
going
had
on?
cadets.
Cadets, of
Yeah,
course.
they were great. We all had uniforms. There was girls and boys.
Yeah.
And Jack was in the cadet band.
Yeah. Any sports clubs, and hockey team, football,
Yeah, yeah. I can
basketball?
remember when I went into grade 9, Mr. Harvey was our principal at that time, and he was a lot younger than I am now, and I thought he was old. I really thought he was old. But somebody get kicked out, and like the Wee Tongues and a gang, and he'd call them by all the old names like Kodak, Blewett, and you know, kids he'd had when he first was up there, and he'd get so mad. And grade 9 was right off his office, and he'd yell at those guys, and he'd say to somebody, "Quit your laughing." And somebody'd be tickling the one that was in front of them, and all those poor guys. But anyway, he's a great old guy.
Any favorite teachers? Mrs. Stabler was mentioned, but any other favorites that come to mind?
They were, I enjoyed them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And discipline, did students get kicked out in those days or told to go and start a career somewhere rather than come back to school the next day?
I don't think so.
University, like today, there's many choices for graduates in the university and community college. There wasn't a community college system at that time. Did students think about university at all?
They probably, not too many, I don't think so, no.
Was there any, just that,
If
was
I-
there, sorry,
If I recall, in the 50s, about 10% of us went to university, and the rest left high school.
Yeah.
Preferably with grade 13, but often with grade 12, and that was the end of it.
yeah. And that's what I was getting at, but do you remember any of your class going to university at all? Did anyone at your age level in Lakefield later go on to university?
I'm trying to think.
John David Girls.
Yeah.
Dream
John?
Kelly,
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Dream Kelly.
There's academy in school, isn't
Okay, yeah. When did the high school move to its present location?
53.
53. Non-school life, what did teenagers do for fun back then?
We played Run Sheep Run on Regent Street. Do you remember that game, Ellen?
Oh,
Yeah, that was a fun game.
Mostly they worked.
And you'd hide in people's outhouses, you know, that was a great spot.
That's Halloween night.
And then you'd have to come back and draw a map. People would try and find you.
Was there any dances
Yeah, there
around?
was Teen Town, actually, Darcy Windsor and Haley started Teen Town in Lakefield. And that was Windsor Cleaners in Peterborough, and every Saturday night we had dances
And where were they?
in the town hall.
Okay. Yeah. And what,
They'd have shows periodically.
We should get it back.
Pardon?
We should get it back.
Oh, yeah.
what kind of music was popular then?
Anything that was on the Nickelodeon was popular. Just still a few songs that are here now, you know.
But bands, they would be
All big bands.
big bands. Can you remember any of the groups at all?
Les Brown. And
The London,
Brothers. Yeah, they were all through Peterborough.
They came to Peterborough?
Yeah,
Okay.
they rock.
So they would be like the rock stars they were the rock stars in their days
Well, they were.
for young
Yeah,
teenagers
yeah.
and so on. Did you ever see Frank Sinatra?
No.
And movies, was there a movie house in Lakefield?
There used to be one over Leonard's Hardware at
Yeah.
one time, but I don't remember.
And they had some in the town hall too.
Yeah,
The town hall.
yeah.
The sign that in Harvard, the one I did with it,
Where was that?
the sign don't have to in Harvard was the movie.
Oh, that's right, yeah, yeah.
Can I give you a little history about the movies at
Sure.
the hardware store? Apparently, the entrance into the gift shop, that became the gift shop, that was the movie theater. But at the time when there was not the talking movies, Perce Payne and his wife were hired to play the piano and the fiddle. But Mrs. Leonard owned the store and would only allow hymns to be played. So no matter whether it was a Western or whatever, they had to play a hymn with the fiddle and the
Mrs. Leonard gave us, Norma and I, good advice one time. She said, why don't you girls gather up flowers and sell them? People just love flowers. So anyway, we went around behind her house, knocked on the door, and she bought the flowers. We used to go up Strickland Street to pick Lily of the Valley. There used to be up by Cephas Little's place. And just get bitten by mosquitoes, just so bad. But he lived in a little one-room shack in there and burnt, collected newspapers, and that's all he burnt, I think, was newspapers to keep warm.
I remember Cephas.
Was he the man that walked to Young's Point to get the waffles? Up one side and down the other?
I don't know.
And took him back to the store in the wheelbarrow.
Yeah, could be.
He used to stop in at Hamlin's and pick up a banana split or.
Oh, he used to eat a brick of ice cream and a pie. He'd order a pie, a whole pie and a brick of ice cream. And then he'd put his teeth in his glass of water.
You mentioned earlier that the teens used to hang out at, where was it?
At the Carnation Inn, or then it was Herb Brown's place. Up on the way home from the rink, we'd stop into Herb's. And that's when those coins come out. Remember there was a bunch of sides on them? What were they called? Yeah.
And there was the ice cream parlor with the iron chairs.
Yes, that was Herb Brown's.
Brown.
Yeah, and that was John David Grell's grandfather.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'd go in there and those coins had just come out and we told Herb that they were worth 25 cents. And Herb hadn't seen them. And he didn't want anything to do with them, but finally he took them. And that was a good, coming from the arena on Saturday nights, it used to be packed in there.
We used to walk around the block in the dark. We were to Toy Store on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And the dad and mothers would be there talking, and we would walk around the bicycle, trying to buy an ice cream road. We used to call it business run. And then the students would 10 minutes and we had to stand or get his car.
Yeah. Yeah.
If a teenager wanted to have a beer before he or she was 21, how easy was it to do that?
I don't really know.
You had to get a note. You had to get a note from Ann's dad.
It was very difficult.
I don't know where they got them, or if they did.
Lots of bootleggers.
Yes, yes. They'd ask for eggs, I think, wouldn't they? 2 dozen eggs.
What radio shows did you listen to then?
Well, hockey,
Foster Hewitt?
yeah.
Yeah.
And Deborah McGee and Molly. And, oh, there was lots of those.
Amos and Andy.
Yeah.
Gilder Steve.
Yeah, they were good.
Yeah.
Good to listen to. Yeah.
When did TV come to Lakefield?
I think Jack Milledge had the first one in Lakefield. Jack Milledge had the first TV in Lakefield. And then Dad got one. And we used to go up every Saturday morning and watch Howdy Doody. And through the snow. Look at that. What? No wonder we all got cataracts. But anyway, then eventually it would fade in and out. And maybe Mike, you maybe were one of the first ones to have one too, were you?
Oh, I don't think so.
No. I know Jack Milledge had one. And then we got one in '54. And Palmer's lived upstairs. Walter Palmer taught, or Eileen Palmer taught. Walter was hydro. And they come down Friday nights to watch the fights, and I never ever did see a fight. They were all just a mass of snow.
Franks with the little
Periodically, you'd see something. I think you got them there.
Couldn't see nothing.
That was terrible. Oh,
Our kids said it's soon the first ones on the street
Well,
because you don't have TV.
Yeah. I do remember the first time I watched TV, and it was at Frank's, and we were little gaffers then, so it had to be the early 50s, I think.
yeah.
And you made us get dressed up.
Probably was going to be there.
Well, you put us in little suits. And we got there. You're right about the snow. And I also remember an Indian head appeared. Just kind of sat there forever. But anyway.
Mom would always feed us lunch then. And lunch came with Howdy Doody, and it was ham sandwich. Oh, it was a great day.
Also in the early 50s, there was the Korean War. Do you have any memories of that?
It was in Korea, I think. I remember coming from Jack playing at the Pines in Bridgenorth, going on our way into the High Tops restaurant after a dance on Saturday night. We had the radio on and they announced that a war broke out in Korea. And that was a Saturday night, but I can't remember the year. And that's the only thing that affected me about the Korean War.
We weren't really involved in it.
No, no.
If there's any baby boomers out there, such as myself, I think about this. If you were born during my mother's, if you're of my mother's generation, you had the Depression, the Second World War, and the Korean War in the first 22 years of your life. And the baby boomers have had no Depression, no Third World War, no Korean War. We are at war now, but we've been very fortunate to escape the tough times that our parents and grandparents went through. Were there any signs that life may be getting better for people in the 50s after they'd gone through the 30s and 40s? People were having a lot of children at that time and buying homes and cars and so on.
They were employed.
They were working. If you wanted to go for a meal with family or friends, where would you go in Lakefield or?
Snack bar at the bridge.
Lakefield Hotel.
Lakefield Hotel, yes, we were up there, you've been up there lots
That
of
was a
times.
grand meal.
Yeah, smorgasbord on Sundays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the snack bar at the bridge.
Stewed jackrabbit.
Play the pinball.
Where would you go in Peterborough if you went for a meal there?
Probably have to be special with Chinese food.
No, Foster's.
Oh,
Family
Foster's,
restaurant.
yeah.
Silver Moon and the one beside her before that one. Silver Moon.
Silver
The
Moon,
Home Family.
High Tops, and Bluebird.
They were there again.
Yeah, oh, man.
They're from the 20s.
Yeah.
They came over the road, they came to school. They were homeboys at Lakefield College.
Can you remember when the beer store, liquor store, came to Lakefield? Was it during the 50s?
No, I don't.
60s? Beer store, liquor
We had to
store?
go to Peterborough before that.
Were there any bars in Lakefield in the 50s?
The hotel, the
The Lakefield Hotel and the commercial.
Okay.
Well, eventually, commercial.
There was one up on top of Strickland Street there. Sahara Room, and he called it that because there was so much sand on the floor.
Maybe it didn't have a name.
Yeah.
Oh, but Rolly.
Why did people from Lakefield go to Toronto back in those days?
Oh, just for an outing. It was a place to go to shop, or go to shows, or just something.
The exhibition,
You go down and go on number 2, right, to Toronto.
How long
Oh,
would,
the Toronto exhibition.
how long would it take to get to Toronto then?
Well, 2.5 hours maybe.
By train.
By car, you go down to Welcome, and then up number 2, yeah.
First time was the food court.
Pardon me?
First time I had to reach that street in Port Oaks and then
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Do you remember Hurricane Hazel in 1954?
Yes.
Any memories?
We were at a banquet at the golf club in Peterborough. And Claire and Mrs. Chittick were looking after you kids at the farmhouse. And we come out of the banquet and the bushes were just bent right over flat that was at the other golf course, not the one you were on to. And so we hurried home, and Claire had been called out with the fire trucks. No power in our house, a light fixture had been blown out of the kitchen, and window panes were smashed, and Mrs. Chittick was crying. She didn't know what to do, and it was a terrible night. Went all night, trees all across roads and up Strickland Street. It was impassable. That's where Claire was.
Yeah. And you mentioned the fire truck. Do you have any memories of memorable fires in Lakefield over the years?
Erskine Store. I remember that because we lived on the main street. Do you remember that, Elmer?
Yeah.
And big ones. Now, I met Hank Weirdsma over when I was getting the mail yesterday, and he said, Jean, do you realize that 50 years ago on the 30th, just down from the garage there was a big fire? And I said, yes, I lived there. It was our barn. 50 years ago on the 30th of May, the barn burned. Do you remember that, Karen? Yeah. It was quite a fire.
I wasn't sure whether Gord Coyle will be here tonight, and I had some hockey questions for him. And the last few questions are about the intermediate team, the Kingdom Lumber Kings of the 50s. And I see Keith and I see Kevin here tonight, so maybe I'll ask Keith and Kevin if they wouldn't mind if they could answer these questions. I remember going to the Lakefield Arena and watching that team play, and it's one of my first memories of watching senior hockey, men play hockey. In the Hall of Fame in Peterborough, whenever I get to see a Pete's game once every 2 years or whatever, I always go through there and I see a jersey of the Lumber Kings, and it takes me back. So my first question is, what I can't remember is, what year was the year that you guys went to the All-Ontario Finals.
1956, Keith?
It was.
And who was the coach and manager of that team?
Well, Garnet Samus and Percy Archer, I don't think either one of them were crowned, but they had a lot to say.
Dr. Bean was the, Dr. Bean? Yeah.
He was the coach?
I believe, Keith, is that right?
Yeah, Doc Bean.
And two of the players are here, and Gore played. Who were some of the other players that played on that team?
Well, yes, Bill Twist, Wasson Brothers,
Must have been a bullet.
yeah, Joe Blue was part of that team. Who else was on that team?
Dick,
Dick McCracken.
yeah. Harding was the goalie?
Not that
No,
year.
okay.
Red Wasson was the goaltender. We had Jack Martin, Paul Doris, Kenny Floyd,
Who was the one-handed, the one-armed hockey player?
Jim Galvin.
But he was in it.
Super.
Was he on that team?
No.
No,
No. Okay.
Earlier.
This is strictly a hockey question. Like, what was the strength of that team, or strengths?
They can skate.
Well, yeah.
Well, a remark by our goaltender after we won that, we played against Port Hope, Orno, Lindsay, Coburg, places that, you know, were more populated than Lakefield. But maybe I'll just stand up.
Yeah.
A fellow that had retired from the professional league after that year, when we won that, and they had numerous people that had played in the NHL that had retired. He said to our goaltender, Red Wasson, knew him very well. He said, I don't know where you guys come from, but he said you have one hell of a hockey team.
The whole point was that it was colder up here, and we had the ice first. So we were better skaters, and the same was true of Lakefield School. They beat the big schools in Toronto because they had more skating.
The coach of the Chiefs came into the coffee shop this morning, and you were there, George, and he gave us good news. Junior West from Orono wished us all well.
No, vaguely, yeah. Just a couple more questions about that team, and maybe a question before the team when you were growing up as youngsters. But this is a Don Cherry question. Did you have a fighter or fighters on the team?
We're all lovers. We love the game.
I remember in the late 40s or early 50s when they had to put the not barbed wire, but the chain link fences over the players' entrances. And the police were always at the arena for the Trent Valley League. It was really violent.
Well, it was a lot of good hockey games. That old ring, it's old ring where you get penalties just to get in and get beside the stove for a second. But I don't think that's the reason that Keith took all the penalties necessarily, but it was one, eh?
Keith didn't win the Lady Bing then. But I remember if it was 56 and 66, I was playing Junior B, and we used to have some battles in Coburg in playoffs B for Peterborough. And the Coburg fans hated the Peterborough team with a passion, and it seemed irrational until it was explained to me that they hated the Peterborough team so much because there's so many Lakefield guys. So I thought back to 56, I guess, and thanked thank you guys for all the butt ends and high sticks the Lakefield boys were receiving. And you went to the Ontario finals. Who did you play in the finals and why did you lose?
We didn't
They didn't score enough goals.
We're like Pittsburgh. I think the only team I can remember is Sundridge.
Yeah, that was the team, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember going up to Sundridge on the bus.
yeah.
Yeah.
With Norman and I.
Now, I ask this question in all seriousness because I watched both teams, and I've never asked anyone this question before. Do you think your Lakefield Lumber Kings could have beaten the Pete's team that year? Like, were you better than the Pete's?
Juniors or the seniors?
Juniors, the first junior Pete's team. They
Probably.
came in 56.
Certainly you could have. It depends a lot on how fast you bled. No, I don't think so.
Seriously?
No, I played junior A and that was the toughest
Then there
goal
was
that you're
Pete's and
gonna
Eagles,
find.
eh? That was quite a league.
We had a good team, but I bet I would say that our intermediate team at that time would be equal to American League teams right now.
Yeah.
The poorer ones.
Yeah. Like the Marlins.
Well, they went pretty good this year.
I must tell you about a little story before I leave. We were playing Boneville one night and we'd all gathered. The fight had not broke out. We were just talking about whether we were going to fight, I guess. But there was a fellow there by the name of Hooper. He was a big fellow. And Keith had been back watching this gathering, and he skated into the gathering, grabbed Mr. Hooper, and gently set him over the boards, and that ended the fight.
I had played with him at Oshawa. He played for the Generals when I did.
That wasn't very nice.
But he was a good guy. He was a native too. You had to treat him right.
Who did you play with, Keith, the year you went out west, that your mom looked after the snack bar?
The
Was that
Belleville
Belleville?
Max.
Yeah. And I can remember being down there, and Keith called his mom after a game, and he was telling her about Ike Hildebrand. And she said, "You killed a man." She was so worked up. That's who you played with.
He was the coach, yeah.
I have some final questions here, just a few more. And we haven't talked about politics or religion. And, you're not supposed to do that in polite company, but it seems to me that Lakefield has an unusually large number of churches for its size. And you look down this street, there's 3 on Regent. And the first church, what is that a good observation or not? Like in comparable towns, size-wise, are there that number of churches in other towns?
communities?
I think there are mostly, yes.
So it's the times. Okay, all right. And so the Christ Church was built first. What was this? Do you know what the second church built in Lakefield was?
St. John's. Christ Church became too small, so they built St. John's.
Okay. And when was the Catholic Church built? Any idea?
It was a house.
Probably Young Point first. St. Mary's and Young Point before Lakefield.
Yeah.
First, like,
No, I'm thinking of Gospel Hall. It was a house before it was a church. Well, it was a church at a house.
Are there any politicians that you can remember from representing Lakefield in the 30s, 40s, 50s?
J.J. Duffus, Gordon K. Fraser, I don't know. Hugh Faulkner came along and...
Sure.
Our best local one was Bill Grant. got the water
That's true.
Okay.
Perry worked for the village, or for the company that put the sewers in. What year was that, Perry?
72.
Yeah, and there was a man killed when you were working right at the post office, or the town hall corner there, I think, wasn't it?
He was the boss. Lakefield's known for famous people that have lived here, especially authors, but there was Margaret Lawrence. Like, was she visible in the town at that time?
Oh, yeah. Well, when she lived
Just
here,
down at
she
the
said
liquor
they
store.
all-
Post office.
There's no liquor store, but
Yeah, you went somewhere.
yeah, would it?
Prince Andrew, was he at the liquor store also?
He was at the drugstore.
My aunt,
But you
I'll
can
see if
go
she
back a little
goes to
bit
buy
farther,
it. She
you
said,
have
look at her
Vincent
going
Clementi,
again.
we had Clementi Street, and he was later in Peterborough, and he was a force in the community, an artist, and there are many more.
Does Lakefield have a writers' festival?
Yeah.
Yearly? I hear from people up where I live occasionally, the English teachers, or you run into a university or whatever, and when you mention you're from Lakefield, they always mention the writing history of Lakefield and how so many famous, especially female authors, were Lakefield and so on. My final question, and I don't know if there's going to be questions from the floor, but my final question is this: if you didn't grow up in Lakefield, where would you like to have grown up?
Nowhere.
Nowhere?
No, lived here all my life.
Okay, all right.
You were mentioning famous people. Well, of course, everyone knew Dr. Gasso, and of course Nick, but I think everyone who lives in Lakefield is famous.
I wasn't sure whether the last question was going to stump Mom, and I wrote down here a hint, a great answer would be just outside Lakefield. And a good answer would be Youngs Point, Durrell, Peterborough, Bristol, and so on. So I'm finished.
Well, what a great ending to the entire evening with your answer, Keith. You are so right. There is no better place to live than Lakefield. And that just sums up everything about the Historical Society and the warmth